Welcome to This Day in His Story, created by American Heritage Worldwide. A reminder that every day holds something new to learn. Did you know that the three-day Battle of Gettysburg was the largest battle ever fought in North America? Learn how nearly 170,000 Union and Confederate soldiers collided into a small Pennsylvania town with only 2,400 residents to fight one of the bloodiest battles in America's history. Discover how the Battle of Gettysburg became a turning point in the Civil War and changed the future of the United States.
Okay, let's unpack this. I want you to imagine, just for a second, waking up in your hometown.
Right.
Let's say it's this quiet, rural place. Everyone knows everyone. You've got maybe, 2,400 people living there. It's super peaceful.
Yeah, the biggest news is like the weather or the local harvest.
Exactly. But then, over the course of just a few days, the equivalent of two massive, sold-out modern sports stadiums suddenly empties out directly into your backyard.
Oh, wow.
And they aren't there for a game. They're there for a war.
It's an almost incomprehensible shift in reality. You go from absolute rural tranquility to the sudden, violent epicenter of the defining conflict of the United States. And it happens literally overnight.
It's crazy. Welcome to today's deep dive. We are looking at the Battle of Gettysburg. And we've got an incredible stack of sources guiding us today. We're pulling from the Gettysburg Leadership Institute's historical accounts, records of President Abraham Lincoln's deeply personal reflections.
Which are fascinating, by the way.
Well, absolutely. We've also got presidential speeches and archives from the Battlefield Museum itself. But I want to be clear with you, the listener, right out of the gate here. Our mission today isn't just to, recite a timeline of military history or map out a bunch of troop movements.
Right, not at all. We are looking at this primarily through the lens of leadership.
Specifically, the absolute extreme edge of crisis leadership.
Exactly. We're examining how a three-day clash in July of 1863 didn't just end lives, but fundamentally preserved a fractured nation. And really, how the people in charge navigated a situation that was completely, spiraling out of control.
The staggering reality is that the fate of the United States was decided in this tiny rural Pennsylvania town. So, to really comprehend the sheer violence of what happened there, we have to establish the terrifying scale of what was moving toward Gettysburg.
And most importantly, why?
Yes, why? Because armies don't just accidentally bump into each other with 170,000 men.
No, they definitely don't. To understand the why, we have to rewind just a bit to June 1863. The Confederate Army of Northern Virginia, led by General Robert E. Lee, had just come off a massive, highly improbable victory against the Union at Chancellorsville, Virginia.
Right.
Lee's army was heavily outnumbered there, but they just outmaneuvered the Union completely.
So Lee is feeling incredibly confident at this point. His men feel invincible.
Invincible is the exact right word for their mindset. So Lee decides to take his army on the march, heading north.
And his goal here is audacious, right? He doesn't just want to win a border skirmish. He wants to take the war out of war-torn Virginia and bring it right to the North's doorstep.
Exactly.
He's looking to threaten major cities like Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, and Baltimore, Maryland. He's letting his troops gather food, shoes, clothing, just scattering them across southern Pennsylvania. But the real prize, he plans to cross the Potomac River and capture Washington, D.C. itself.
It was a strategy designed to induce total political panic. And honestly, it worked flawlessly in those early weeks. Northern newspapers were absolutely filled with terrifying stories of Confederate raids.
I can imagine.
Yeah, citizens were reading about Lee's army marching through their towns, requisitioning livestock and supplies. The psychological warfare was heavily underway well before the main armies even met.
So by late June, the Union's Army of the Potomac is on a desperate, forced march to intercept Lee before he can reach the capital. And this brings us back to that population explosion I mentioned earlier. You have 170,000 total soldiers converging on Gettysburg. Just a tidal wave of humanity descending on this village. But I have to ask you, was Lee simply blinded by his recent victory at Chancellorsville? Was he just riding a high? Or did he genuinely believe that marching into hostile territory and capturing the capital was the absolute only way to end this war?
Well, if we connect this to the bigger picture, Lee wasn't just acting out of ego. He saw a very specific, fleeting window to break the Union's will to fight. You have to remember the mechanics of the Civil War at this point. A drawn-out war of attrition heavily favored the North.
Right, because they had more factories, more railroads, and frankly, a much larger population to draft from.
Precisely. The South could not replace its losses at the same rate. Lee knew that if the war dragged on for years, the Confederacy would eventually bleed out. So this wasn't just arrogance, it was a highly calculated, high-stakes gamble.
He felt he had to bring the brutal reality of the war to the Northern populace.
Yes, to force Northern politicians to demand a peace treaty. But the danger of a gamble like that is that every subsequent decision you make carries the weight of the entire war.
Which brings us to the actual collision on the ground. Day 1, July 1st, 1863. It starts completely by chance when advanced Union cavalry arrives in Gettysburg and just, bumps into about 7,000 Confederate troops.
Right, troops who had been sent into town essentially looking for supplies.
Yeah, and it quickly escalates into a massive engagement. And on that first day, the fighting centers around a crucial piece of high ground called Cemetery Hill.
And this is where a single moment of hesitation alters the entire trajectory of the battle, and quite possibly the war. Lee's forces are driving the Union troops back through the streets of Gettysburg, and Lee sees an opportunity to crush them completely.
Oh.
Seeking to press his advantage, he sends an order to his subordinate, General Richard Ewell, to attack Cemetery Hill before more Union troops can arrive and entrench themselves.
Wait, hold on. I have to stop you there. This is Robert E. Lee giving the order. But he doesn't do it. How does a subordinate general just ignore a direct command during a critical invasion?
Well, it comes down to the exact phrasing of the order and really the psychology of the man receiving it. Lee's order to Ewell was to take the hill if practicable.
If practicable. That's a lot of wiggle room.
Exactly. Lee was used to giving discretionary orders to his previous commander, the legendary Thomas J. Stonewall Jackson. Jackson would take a vague order like that and aggressively exploit every advantage. Ewell, however, looked at the hill, feared the Union's defensive position was already too strong, decided it was not practicable, and held his troops back.
Here's where it gets really interesting, because it is so easy for us to sit here, over a century and a half later, looking at a map and judge Ewell for freezing up.
Oh, absolutely.
But look at the intense psychological context here.
Yeah.
Ewell had literally just taken command of the Army of Northern Virginia's Second Corps. Why? Because Stonewall Jackson had just been mortally wounded weeks earlier at Chancellorsville.
Right.
So Ewell is suffering from massive imposter syndrome. Imagine the unimaginable pressure of stepping into the shoes of a military legend right in the middle of a critical invasion and immediately being asked to send your men up a heavily defended hill without a rigid, direct command.
You're hitting on the core human element of crisis leadership. Ewell is paralyzed by the fear of making a catastrophic mistake in Jackson's shatter. And what's fascinating here is the massive ripple effect of that single choice to hold back. Because Ewell hesitates, the door is left wide open for the Union.
Right, because overnight, tens of thousands of Union reinforcements pour into the area. And they don't just sit in the town. They use that time to extend a massive defensive line.
Yes, they form what looks like a giant fishhook on the map.
A fishhook, yeah.
Starting at Cemetery Hill, running all the way down a ridgeline called Cemetery Ridge, and ending at a rugged, rocky hill known as Little Round Top. Ewell's hesitation literally handed the Union the ultimate tactical advantage, the high ground.
And we really need to explain why the high ground matters so much here. It's not just about, running uphill being tiring.
Oh, no, it's about geometry and line of sight. If you hold the ridge, you control where the artillery goes, you can see the enemy's movements across the open fields below, and your cannons can fire over the heads of your own infantry. Furthermore, that fishhook shape meant the Union had interior lines. If the Confederates attacked the right flank, the Union commander could easily march reinforcements straight across the inside of the hook to reinforce it.
In a fraction of the time, it would take the Confederates to maneuver around the outside.
Exactly.
Which directly sets the stage for the absolute horrors of the next 2 days. On July 2nd, the focus shifts down to the bottom of that fishhook to Little Round Top. Lee orders General James Longstreet to strike the Union on the left, while Ewell is ordered to strike on the right.
The violence of that second day is almost impossible to overstate. Little Round Top was the anchor of the Union line. If the Confederates could take it, they could position cannons there and fire directly down the length of the entire Union Army, rolling them up completely.
It was desperate, hand-to-hand combat in the rocks and trees. Several key Union officers died desperately defending that hill because they knew if it fell, the battle was over. The losses on day 2 are staggering.
Completely staggering.
We are looking at more than 9,000 casualties on each side in a single day. By the end of day 2, the combined casualties totaled nearly 35,000 men.
And yet, despite the horrific loss of life, and despite failing to take the flanks, Lee's psychological state hasn't shifted. He still believes victory is close.
Really? After all that.
Yes, he thinks, well, we attack the left, we attack the right. The Union must have weakened their center to reinforce the sides.
So on day 3, Lee decides to throw a massive punch right at the middle of the Union line.
Right into the center.
He orders an attack led by Major General George Pickett. He sends 15,000 troops out of the tree line and directly into the center of the enemy's ranks on Cemetery Ridge. This becomes known as Pickett's Charge. And I want you, the listener, to really visualize the mechanics of this. Imagine walking the length of 13 football fields.
Nearly 3/4 of a mile.
You are marching shoulder to shoulder across completely open farmland with absolutely zero cover, and staring down at you from a slightly elevated stone wall is the entire center of the Union Army.
And you are marching into a technological meat grinder. The weapons had evolved since the days of the Revolutionary War.
Yeah, they're not using old muskets anymore.
Exactly. The Union soldiers behind that wall aren't using inaccurate smoothbore muskets. They are using rifled muskets, which can accurately kill a man at several hundred yards.
Plus the Union artillery.
Yes. The Union cannons were firing spherical case shot and canister shot, which essentially turns a cannon into a giant shotgun.
Oh, man.
As those 15,000 Confederate soldiers crossed that open field, they were being hit from the front and enfiladed meaning fired upon from the sides by artillery along the ridge.
They fought for hours. That assault miraculously did manage to pierce the Union lines at a small angle in the stone wall. But ultimately, the mechanism of the defense was just too overwhelming. Union forces violently pushed back the threat. Thousands of Southern soldiers were killed or captured on that open ground.
The overconfidence born from Lee's previous victories led to the literal decimation of his own forces against that stone wall.
The final death toll of the Battle of Gettysburg is difficult to even process. 28,000 Confederate soldiers and 23,000 Union soldiers dead, wounded, or missing. 51,000 casualties in just 3 days.
It forced an absolute turning point. After those 3 days of intense fighting, Lee had to face reality. He withdrew his badly wounded army in the pouring rain, retreating back through western Maryland into Virginia.
It was the definitive end of Lee's strategic gamble. The Confederates would never mount another major northern invasion.
Ever again.
Now, you'd think that as Lee is retreating, there would be massive celebrations in Washington, D.C., but I want to shift our focus away from the battlefield and look at the leadership crisis happening 80 miles away in the Capitol. Let's look at President Abraham Lincoln during that exact same week.
This is a remarkable part of the story.
We have this incredible record of Lincoln visiting Union General Daniel Sickles in a hospital in D.C. Sickles had commanded the 3rd Corps and literally had his right leg blown off by a cannonball at Gettysburg just days prior.
And during this hospital visit, Sickler asks the president a very direct question. Had Lincoln been nervous before the battle? Lincoln's response is incredibly raw and revealing about the psychology of executive leadership.
He confesses to absolute, total panic. He describes the atmosphere in Washington, saying that everybody seemed panic-stricken and nobody could tell what was going to happen. You have to remember the context for Lincoln here. He wasn't just worried about losing a battle, he was terrified of repeating history.
Exactly, because the Union Army had just suffered massive, humiliating defeats at Fredericksburg the previous December and Chancellorsville in May. Lincoln felt personally responsible for those staggering losses. The gravity of those failures was oppressing him.
So what does this all mean for us looking back? When I read Lincoln's reflections, I marvel at the stark contrast between how these two leaders, Lee and Lincoln, experienced this exact crisis.
Yeah, it's striking.
You have Lee physically on the battlefield. He has agency. He is dynamically calling shots, adjusting tactics, moving tens of thousands of troops. But then you have Lincoln, trapped in an office in Washington, D.C.
This raises an important question about the nature of modern leadership. How do you manage the unbearable weight of events when the outcome is entirely out of your physical control?
Right.
Lincoln couldn't ride a horse onto Cemetery Ridge. He couldn't position the artillery. He couldn't rally the men. He had to sit in a room reading chaotic telegraph messages, knowing the nation was bleeding out. And he had absolutely exhausted all of his physical tools to stop it. It is a profound, terrifying loneliness.
So what did he do with that helplessness? How did he cope?
Well, Lincoln told General Sickles that during the height of this panic, when the telegraphs were bringing the worst news, he went to his room, locked the door, got down on his knees before Almighty God, and prayed mightily for victory.
He was completely desperate. He literally told God that the Union Army could not stand another disaster, like Fredericksburg or Chancellorsville.
And in that locked room, Lincoln made a highly personal, solemn vow.
Stripped of all his presidential power, he told God that if he would stand by the boys at Gettysburg, then Lincoln would stand by him.
And Lincoln said that after making that vow, a sweet comfort crept into his soul.
A sweet comfort,
He
yes.
couldn't explain it logically, but he felt an absolute assurance that things would go all right at Gettysburg. I want to ask you, the listener, to reflect on that specific moment. Think about what it takes for a leader of that incredible magnitude, a president in the middle of a civil war, to admit total, absolute powerlessness,
It takes immense humility.
to literally drop to the floor behind a locked door. What can you learn from Lincoln's solemn vow in your own moments of severe crisis, when you've done everything you physically, intellectually can, and the outcome is entirely out of your hands?
It is a fascinating mechanism for coping with executive paralysis. By surrendering the illusion of control, Lincoln was able to find the mental clarity to keep leading. He offloaded the unmanageable burden of the battle's outcome so he could focus on the aftermath.
That makes so much sense.
And what's truly remarkable is how Lincoln's deeply personal, locked-room coping mechanism rapidly blossomed outward into a public mandate for national healing.
Just 12 days after the battle ended, on July 15, 1863, Lincoln proclaimed a national day of prayer. And the wording of that proclamation is so telling about his mindset. He didn't use it to spike the football or gloat over a Union victory.
No, he invited the people of the United States to invoke the influence of the Holy Spirit to subdue the anger which had produced and sustained such a cruel rebellion.
Subdue the anger. That is so powerful. He was already looking past the blood on the grass in Pennsylvania. He was synthesizing the trauma of the battlefield into a desperate quest for national unity.
He knew that winning the war militarily meant nothing if the anger wasn't subdued.
Right.
And that specific takeaway, the vital, non-negotiable necessity of remaining a united people, echoed down through generations of American leadership. To see how deeply this impacted the nation's DNA, we can look over a century later. On September 17, 1937, President Franklin D. Roosevelt reflected on this exact conflict at a memorial event.
FDR said that it serves us little to discuss again the rights and wrongs of the war. He stated clearly that we revere the memory of the brave men who fought on both sides. But crucially, he added that looking back, we know today it was best for all the generations of Americans who came after that the conflict did not end in a division of the land into two nations.
FDR concluded by saying, "I like to think that it was the will of God that we remain one people."
Wow.
That is the enduring through line of this entire event, from the tactical hesitations on the first day, to the bloody defense of Little Round Top, to Lincoln pacing in his locked room in Washington, and finally to FDR a century later. The fundamental lesson extracted from the incredible 51,000 casualty tragedy of Gettysburg was the absolute necessity of unity. The hard-won understanding that divided the nation fails.
It would take 2 more agonizing years of fighting until Lee finally surrendered to Ulysses S. Grant at Appomattox, ending the war. But Gettysburg was the crucible that ensured the Union would hold.
It really was.
It really puts the scale of history into perspective. We've covered an incredible journey in this deep dive. We started with 170,000 soldiers descending like a tidal wave on a tiny, unsuspecting town of just 2,400 people. We explored the psychology of split-second hesitations and high-stakes tactical gambles that cost tens of thousands of lives across those terrifying 3 days.
And we witnessed the quiet, locked-room prayers of a desperate president trying to mentally hold the very fabric of the country together.
It serves as a powerful reminder that history is never just a dry collection of dates or a textbook map of troop movements.
Definitely not.
It is the true, lived story of how we became who we are today. And that identity was paid for in blood and shaped by flawed, overwhelmed leaders navigating the absolute extremes of human crisis.
Perfectly said.
So as we wrap up, I want to leave you with one final lingering question to mull over on your own. If a tiny, quiet town of 2,400 people could somehow absorb the explosive, violent collision of 170,000 soldiers, and if a deeply fractured nation could somehow find a way to knit itself back together into one people after losing 51,000 men in just 3 days, how does that historical resilience change how you view the modern divisions we face in our world today? Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. We'll see you next time.
Thank you for joining us for this day in his story. May the lessons of yesterday inspire you to see God's hand today and to play your part in his story now. For more faith-based learning, visit ahsworldwide.org, the homeschool for faith and family.